Okay, my name is Linda Loft, and I am from the Tyne-Daneaga Mohawk Reserve in southeastern Ontario. Yeah, I was raised by my grandparents, paternal grandparents, and my grandmother was the first native Baha'i in Canada, and my grandfather was the first Mohawk Baha'i.
Wow.
Yeah, Sarah Melba Loft.
Wow.
Yeah. Actually, she was a Weetongue, Sarah Melba Weetongue Loft.
No.
She was raised on a trap line, and she portaged, and she didn't speak English until she was 10 years old. Yes.
So what was her native language?
Ojibwae.
Ojibwae.
Yes.
Do you speak fluent?
I know because I know some of the Ojibwae words, and I also know some of the Mohawk. See, my Mohawk, the Mohawk comes from my grandfather, and the Ojibwae with my grandmother. She was a young Ojibwae girl who fell in love with my grandfather, who at that point in time the Ojibwaes and the Mohawks really didn't see eye to eye with each other. But they got along, they were okay, but it would be my grandfather, my grandmother's grandfather, and my grandfather's grandfather were both chiefs. And they would, if my grandfather was there, then my grandmother's father, who was the chief, would go in the other room. And, like a relationship, but long story short, they eloped to Detroit, Michigan, and my grandfather became foreman of Chrysler's in Detroit. My grandmother became inspector of a chemical plant in Detroit. They lived in a Spanish-style home. They had a black maid. They were very successful, and this was in the early 40s at this time, 40s, 30s, 40s, because my father was about, how old was he? Because Art was 16, Evelyn was 10, Art was 14, and my dad would be about 17, 18 at the time. He was being scouted out by the Detroit basketball team. And this is just prior for them, before they moved back to Canada amongst their own people. My grandmother became a Baha'i in the early 40s, and around 40s, 49, they moved from Detroit, because they were living in Detroit, Michigan, to the reserve through the wishes of the grandson of the Prophet Baha'u'llah. My grandfather had written a letter to him and asking what he could do to further this faith. And the guardian he is referred to as, told them to return to their people. So they did. They sold everything in Detroit and moved back to the reserve. Lived amongst their own people and their family. They had 3 children, and my dad, that was my dad, and an uncle of mine and an aunt of mine. They were just teenagers when they moved back to Canada. And when they moved back to Canada from Detroit, because they had eloped, when they came back to Canada through the wishes of Shogi Effendi, they resided on the Mohawk Reserve. Back onto the reserve, they ended up going back into a home of my, I guess it would be my grandfather's aunt, who had willed this property and this big house, big home. A stucco basement, like stone, boulders. That's how old it was. It was well over 100 years old when my grandparents moved in 1949. So what they did was get to know the people. Their life, their children's life was a lot harder than mine was. So I wasn't born then yet. And But anyway, their lives was difficult. They were, the reserve didn't know them, for one thing. They were run off the road. The children were made fun of, the whole thing. But they continued to live amongst the people. They continued to stay there. They didn't break up because of this and run away from it. No, they didn't. My grandfather ended up building a garage and continuing to stay on the reserve. They took in foster children. Those children went to school. Their own children continued to go to school, graduated, and their daughter became swearing in for the Supreme Court of Ontario. She worked at that job for quite a while, had a family, and their son, he went into the Air Force and retired from the American Air Force. My dad was killed when he was in a car accident when he was 22. I was 2.5, and he left 3 young babies behind. My sister and my younger sister was 6 weeks old. The faith itself, if we go a little ways back, no, not back, but forward from where I'm taken off from here, when I was about in my teens, there had been Baha'is. My mother had become a Baha'i. My sisters became Baha'is. My cousins became Baha'is. And there are people on the reserve that became Baha'is. People on the reserve became Baha'i shortly after my grandparents arrived there. And then it's just spread since then, around the, what would I say, world, you might say.
Yeah.
How my grandmother came into the faith, or she was the instigator. When her children were little, she knew there must be something different. There has to be something different in this world. And she was searching. She was searching for something different. She prayed about something different. The plight of the native people, the plight like her own people, her children. And so she would go for walks. And she read a sign, Baha'i faith, everyone welcome. And she had these 2 friends. And so she went in to find out about this. Now, her 2 friends were Baha'is to begin with. But when she read the sign, she went in, sat down, and realized that everybody in that room, because she sat in the back, as you just walk in the door, she sat down, and nobody paid no attention to her. They didn't ask her questions. They passed around a book, and she read out of this book, but they didn't really try to get her to be a Baha'i. She has to do that on her own. But she didn't know that at the time. And at that time, she read out of the book, and that seemed to be really good. And she goes home, and next week she's back there again, getting to know the people. And my grandfather wanted to know what was going on. So he decided that he's going to go to these meetings too. And make a long story short, he became a Baha'i. She had become a Baha'i. And when my grandfather became a Baha'i, he's the one who wrote to the guardian, the grandson of Baha'u'llah, and grandson of Abd Baha. And anyway, they moved back to the reserve. Mm-hmm. They didn't, well, actually, I didn't declare until I was 21, because my grandparents believed that we should learn the Longhouse religion as well as Christianity. I went to church on the reserve, and I was in the choir, and also I went to all the meetings that were held on the reserve with the Baha'is. So I had a opportunity to learn both religions and the original religion with the Longhouse, traditional ways. When I was growing up, there was always Baha'is traveling from Toronto to Montreal, and our place was the reserve was sort of like in the center of that, and the Baha'is would stop in, and then we would have a meeting. And as a child growing up, I was always involved in meeting these people. I loved them like my grandparents loved them as well, and they were of different nationalities that were stopping in to visit us. And so when in the Baha'i writings, you're taught this from the time you're little until you're 15 and can decide whether you want to be a Baha'i or whether you don't want to be a Baha'i. In my situation, I did not declare to be a Baha'i until 21 because of the fact that I felt that I wasn't good enough to be a Baha'i. Like my grandparents and like the people that came to visit and like the Baha'i friends that I had met. And although I knew the history of the faith and the principles of the faith and everything else, but I still felt that there was something that I needed to do or learn until this one speaker came to the reserve. Actually, she came to Peterborough, and we went to Peterborough to listen to her talk. And what she said is, if you're looking for a reason to become a Baha'i and you feel that you're not good enough for it, none of us are good enough for it. We learn as we go along. We learn as we experience things in life. Well, that changed my mind right there. Yeah. And yes, definitely. This is good. It's a training ground we're living on every day. Beautiful, I would say beautiful in the sense that in relation to what the Baha'i teachings state, that the native people, once they learn about the teachings of Baha'u'llah and accept in their hearts, they will illuminate the rest of the world. As far as the Baha'i faith is concerned, the Baha'i faith, I just can't explain the feeling that I have in my heart towards my fellow human beings. Because in the Baha'i, the Baha'is believe that we work towards unity and the unity of the races and the peoples of the world into one human family. And I believe that as far as religion is concerned, the various religions of the past is like they came at various periods of time for the betterment and the needs of the people at that time. Therefore, as a Baha'i, we believe that Baha'u'llah, who is the glory of God, came for the people in this day, for the needs of the people in this day, towards love and unity and various principles as well, and world needs and the conditions of the world we live in today.